Good morning and welcome to the Dittonworks YouTube channel where I discuss various aspects of speakers. And today seems to be a bit of a common theme just of late. I'm going to be talking about Spendor. What I've picked up recently is a pair of Spendor SP3 ones, which are very different from my SP22s or the SP23s I reviewed the other day. These ones actually came with their original paperwork, which is really quite nice. I like that. Although I did chuckle, these came with a 5-year warranty, which I'm afraid expired in about 1999. It might have been 2000. But it's nice to have the paperwork, and it's a pretty comprehensive little booklet you get with Spendors that I didn't have with the other ones. Even got the original receipt. So having a browse through here, a couple of things that I noticed with these SP3 ones was their crossover point. Now, these are a completely different design to my SP22s or the 23s. So the SP22 design is quite a large, what I would consider quite a large two-way stand mount speaker that's front ported with an 8-inch bass driver. The SP3 ones are a much smaller cabinet. They're infinite baffle, so sealed, no port, and a 6.5-inch bass driver. And their crossover point, so the SP23 crosses over at a fairly common 3 kilohertz, and the SP31, which according to this brochure is higher up the pecking order, if you like, it crosses over at 4 kilohertz. Now, that's not just down to the fact that they've changed the crossover point, it's because it's a totally different design. So it's a smaller cabinet, it's a sealed cabinet, and it's smaller drivers. So I was quite interested to hear how they sound. Unfortunately, like I've discovered with several pairs of Spendors that I've had from this era, that the surrounds have started to go hard. So I applied my brake fluid technique to these, and it has worked definitely on my SP22s. I've been using those for about 3 months now, fairly consistently, and the mechanical movement of the bass drivers has completely returned. They have fantastic LF. I'm pretty sure that it's worked. Now, if you look on any of the forums that are suggesting this brake fluid technique, they say you have to continually repeat the process. Now, something I did mention on my brake fluid video that I did a few months back is that I did it while offering the rubber some heat. Now, back then I did it with the radiator on and the actual chassis sitting on top of the radiator, so some heat was coming in through the surround, not an intense amount of heat. I wouldn't use a hairdryer or a heat gun or anything like that. It's going to be far too severe. As it was a bit warmer and I didn't need the central heating on while I was playing about with the SP3 ones, I actually did it in the garden for 2 reasons. Playing about with brake fluid, it's a horrible material. It's not very nice, so handle with care. And secondly, out in the garden with a little bit of ultraviolet radiation coming from the sun, it did actually slowly warm up the surrounds and gave them a bit of suppleness so I could work in this brake fluid. And it seems to have worked. I'm pretty pleased with how these sound at the minute. Let's have a closer look at them. So, as with the SP22s, this is Spendor's own bass unit. And I have had these apart just to use the drivers out in the sun for the brake fluid thing. And again, that double magnet structure, they're a cast chassis, so they're incredibly well made. These boxes were absolutely stuffed with foam wadding. I had to remove quite a lot of wadding to get down into the crossover to have a look at it. Unfortunately, I didn't take any pictures, which I regret. And this is what we've got, a very compact two-way bookshelf, or I hate the term bookshelf, they should never be on a bookshelf, two-way compact stand mount speaker. Now, I have played about with these over the past few days and I've discovered that these sound far better on 60cm stands. I tried them on my target stands that my AVIs normally sit on for home cinema use. The only trouble is I don't have any open frame stands that are 60cm high. So just for this video, I've left them on my stands that the SP22s normally sit on. But very, very well made cabinets. Still that kind of lossiness, but they're incredibly well made. The fit and finish is sort of furniture grade 100%, and I would have imagined these were probably quite a lot of money when they were new. On the bill it says they were £700, which I'm not sure was a slightly discounted price, but that's quite a lot more than the SP22s were, according to the paperwork I've got for those. So let's discuss the in-depths of this. We talked about the crossover point being different. So when I initially plugged these in, these had absolutely zero bass response. Like I said, these surrounds had gone hard, so the cone couldn't move properly. You haven't got a proper amount of extension, so the bass response is terrible. Even after doing this and getting the surrounds nice and supple, so there's a good amount of movement there now, being a sealed cabinet, they are not going to produce the same amount of bass as the larger brothers for two reasons. Bigger driver, bigger cabinet, ported. Smaller driver, smaller cabinet, sealed. It's going to be a different kind of bass. Also, the crossover point is different. So we can't expect these to sound anything like the SP22s. Although, often people mention the sort of house sound, so to speak. And I would say these do have a Spendor house sound, definitely. Again, differences between the two. So the SP22s are quite large, so anywhere I'm sitting in the room, they fill the room full of sound. They've got a lovely big sound stage, tremendous speakers. I absolutely love those. These seem to be a much more near field type monitor, maybe a midfield type of monitor. That if you're right at the far side of the room, you can detect that there's not an enormous amount of bass. It's there, it's solid, it's fast, it's very coherent, but it's not particularly prominent, and a lot of that is down to a smaller driver. But when you're sitting in a midfield or near field position, the stereo imaging, the imaging is almost holographic. They are very, very good at disappearing into the background. Musical placement is very good as well. I often use the Imperial March from Empire Strikes Back, A, because I love the piece of music, and B, you can, when you're listening to that, you can detect where the musicians are placed on the stage within the recording, and these are very good at drawing that out. So I would imagine these are excellent as monitors. So you've got that. I mean, if we look at things like an LS35A, they are sealed. They're a sealed cabinet. You get a particular type of bass response from a sealed cabinet. My Celestion SL6s or 600s are a sealed cabinet. You get a particular type of bass. I've always been a fan of an infinite baffle, but more recently, after having the SP22s, where you don't hear that port at all, it's not an audible port, but that definite low-end extension that you're getting from that bass port is really good. I thoroughly enjoy those, and it took my ears a little while to get used to this more infinite baffle type of sound. Anyway, let's have a listen to them and see what you guys think. The other thing I forgot to mention is these are quite a lot less efficient than the SP22s or the SP23s, thus meaning you need a more powerful amp, or to get the same volume you need to in the room, you need to turn the dial up a little bit. And I don't mind that, to be honest with you. I'm quite used to inefficient speakers, but when you look at the actual number on the dial, you're like, really, does it need to be that high? But yes, that is the drawback of an infinite baffle speaker. You need more power, you need to drive them a bit harder because they're not as efficient. A ported speaker is going to give you a lot more for a lot less power. Let's have a listen. So initially the SP3 ones didn't impress me. Now, Spendor are one of those brands that the speaker does not chuck it in your face. They are not what I would call a wow speaker, an instant wow speaker. What you find with these is if you sit down and spend a bit of time listening to them and let your ears adjust to the different tonal characteristics of the speaker, you're soon invited into this world. And now these are working properly, they are a fantastic near or midfield pair of speakers, something that would be ideal in a smaller room. However, you would need quite a powerful amp to get the most out of them. These would sound nice on a single-ended valve amp, for argument's sake, but I don't know whether it'd be able to drive them properly. This is a common problem I found with things like the Celestion SL600s, that they sound absolutely their best when they're given quite an amount of wattage. Certainly 100, 150, 200 watts per channel is going to drive them much, much better than say my old single-ended triode amplifiers would. So in a smaller room with a decent amount of power, the SP3 ones sound really quite good, and they do indeed invite you into it. I'm not sure how it will come out on the recording of this because I'm reliant on the microphone on the camera. In the room, they sounded absolutely fine. They do sound a little bit better on 60cm stands, but to be honest with you, keep moving these target stands, which weigh and probably 40 something kilos each, having to keep moving those around. I just thought for demonstration purposes I would leave them on my stands, the normal stands, because the SP22s are going to go back on in a minute and I'll have a listen to them for the rest of the day. But to summarise, they are very typical Spendor house sound. They just sound very different to the typical house sound of the SP2 series. So they're not as big, they're not as expansive, they don't have the same low frequency response, but the HF is very similar. The mid-range, however, is where they are brilliant. So that upper bass to mid is fantastic. And that's where that crossover point really pays dividends. That the tweeter isn't having to do as much work in the mid-band area, and the mid-bass can do more work in the upper bass to mid-range area. So particularly on vocals or instruments that fall within that frequency range, they are clear and shine through perfectly. They're quite enjoyable to listen to. But like I said, they need to be in a smaller room. They won't fill a room with sound like their larger brothers will. Very interesting pair of speakers. I'm glad I got them working. Very well built, very well designed. And again, typical, pleasant to listen to. I think when I A/B'd them with the AVI Bigotrons, the Bigotrons just wowed you straight away. They've got much more scale, much more dynamic, much more bass even, and it's a very, very deep bass. But, and as much as I love those AVIs, and the AVIs are very good in the mid-range area as well, the Spendors do image slightly better, and they are a little bit more inviting. It's, how can I explain that? I think the AVIs are front row. So if you're at a concert, you're in the front row with the AVIs and you're really getting it. With the Spendors, you're probably in the mid row somewhere, maybe a little bit more, maybe in one of the boxes, private box up on the balcony. So you've got a little bit of a private performance, which probably isn't quite as in your face as being in the front row, but equally pleasant and probably a little bit more personal and probably a little bit more heartfelt, to be honest with you. You do have to sit there and have a listen to Spendors. Anyway guys, that's a very long-winded little bit at the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Take care and I'll speak to you soon. Oh, by the way, in the upcoming weeks there is going to be some reviews of new product. So I've managed to lay my hands on some brand new design speakers. So I haven't got to mess about with repairing anything, which I do enjoy doing, but at least I'll know out of the box they're sounding exactly as they should. So I hope you guys look forward to seeing that. I'll catch up with you soon.